patience, dedication, and probing questions. I'm representing Grow Smart Rhode Island. We're a 21-year-old nonprofit public interest group focused on promoting community revitalization and preservation of our great natural resources simultaneously. And one of the issues that we are most focused on is incenting reuse of our historic buildings, particularly in our urban town and village centers. We've been longstanding proponents of the state historic tax credit. We think it's probably the single most impactful smart growth initiative that the state has seen in 20 years. And as Jason was indicating, Rhode Island is blessed in our view, and I think it's empirically demonstrated, with the nation's most outstanding concentrated collection of historic buildings and neighborhoods of any state in America. When you talk about a concentrated collection of these structures and neighborhoods, there's no state. We can compete with any place in America when it comes to that asset. And so I think it's critical that we put resources, whether it's through Rebuild Rhode Island or the state historic tax credit, into capitalizing fully on this asset. We would love to see the state historic tax credit recapitalized, but it doesn't seem as though the political stars are aligned for that. And therefore, we are here today to support enthusiastically the very positive reforms to Rebuild Rhode Island that have already been previewed by Secretary Pryor. And I think those reforms will make Rebuild Rhode Island a substantially more attractive and user-friendly program for historic rehab projects, especially the smaller ones that, by and large, for a variety of reasons, haven't participated in Rebuild Rhode Island to date. But I think these reforms can enable that situation to change. And there's compelling evidence of pent-up demand for historic rehab activity. Not all the big projects and the small projects have been done. Now, the latest figures from the Rhode Island Division of Taxation indicate that there are 36 projects on the state historic tax credit waiting list. So as you probably know, the state historic tax credit technically still exists. It's operating on financial fumes, but it does still exist, and there is this waiting list of 36 projects. They represent an investment in the state's economy, a proposed investment of more than $250 million, that's a B, $250 million, and are seeking a little less than a quarter of that over time from the state to make that investment. So there is pent-up demand. If we're not in a situation right now where the state historic tax credit is going to be recapitalized, making Rebuild Rhode Island a more user-friendly and impactful program for historic rehab is absolutely critical, and we commend Commerce RI for really stepping up to the plate to try to seize this opportunity. There are a couple of specific things Commerce RI has proposed that we're particularly enthusiastic about. One is to streamline and simplify the rebuild application process for smaller historic rehab projects. And we would like to see details about these proposed changes either incorporated into the budget article or addressed through published regulations or guidelines. We're also very pleased with the commitment from Commerce RI to waive for smaller historic rehab projects the requirement for repayment of a portion of the whatever profits they generate to the state. That may be a fine and necessary requirement for larger projects, but for smaller projects, especially those involved with affordable housing, it's really daunting. And I think Commerce RI has clearly they've recognized that, and I think that's another important step forward. We would like to propose for your consideration 2 friendly amendments. I would emphasize friendly amendments to the reforms that Commerce RI has proposed for Rebuild Rhode Island. The first would specify that half of the additional $100 million in funding for Rebuild that's being requested today be reserved for historic rehab activity. That actually isn't that much of a leap from what the current situation is. I think 30 to 35% of rebuild funds to date have been spent on historic rehab. But if we're going to make it easier for more historic rehab projects to go forward, and we believe that's a priority, I think this is a reasonable amendment to consider. The second thing I would propose as a friendly amendment is that we eliminate the current cap of 15% on the share of total rebuild funds that can be allocated to small projects. I'm not saying there automatically should be more than 15% allocated to those small projects, but I think that's kind of an artificial figure that may undermine the flexibility and our ability to take advantage of what are the best opportunities. So I would commend your considering that. Final point, I know I'm a little over my time probably, is one of the things that's not in this proposal, I see it, is continued funding for the Main Street Streetscape Improvement Program. And I think that has demonstrated in 16 different communities a lot of progress for small merchants who sometimes are struggling and the main streets that they're on. And we would recommend that you consider continuing that funding of this good program that is a brainchild, to give credit where credit is due, of Commerce RI. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I wish I had a lot of friendly amendments, but in my world, I have to work on them. You know, I learn a lot from every amendment, though. Thanks, Scott.
Thank
yes,
you.
sir.